Good afternoon or good morning. Welcome to today's webinar, Catalogs and Sessions, What to Choose. So the primary thing that we want to explain today is basically the difference between the two, what they're good for, and which one you should choose for your work. And I say we, as it's not just myself today. Sitting right next to me is Alex. That's the guy at the bottom. Hello, Alex.
Yeah, hi.
Hi. And I'm at the top. That's me, David, part of the software sales team based out of Copenhagen in Denmark, as is Alex as well. So we're going to divide it up today as we've done before. So I'm the catalog nerd, so I'm going to do that bit. And then Alex is somewhat more of the session nerd, so he's going to do that part as well. As usual, we have a max of 60 minutes. I say a max, we did overrun a bit this morning, but we shall endeavour to be more concise this afternoon. And you're very welcome and encouraged to ask questions throughout. On your Mac or PC, at the bottom of the GoToWebinar control panel, you'll see the last section is called questions. Put a question in there that will come through to us. On your Android device or iOS device, tap the question mark icon. And you can ask a question in the same way. We are recording the session as well, so you can always pick that up on YouTube tomorrow. Before we swing into CaptureOne, we're going to very briefly define what is a catalog and what is a session. And they're two quite very different beasts. It's not right or wrong to use one or the other. Really, you can fit either to the kind of work you're doing, or really what you want to achieve with CaptureOne. So, first of all, a catalog is very much database driven, and you'll see that when we make a catalog in CaptureOne. So the database is the brain, if you like. It tracks where your images are, so their locations, and it also contains all adjustments for all those images, metadata, like camera metadata, keywords, and so on. Previews as well. So a preview, if you like, a little small version of the raw file is also stored in the database for reasons which we'll explain later. And the other handy thing about having a catalog is that images could be on your internal hard drive, external hard drive, or other places like servers, for example. Or it could be a combination of all three. So again, with a catalog, you're not really restricted to where your images are, as the database knows how to find them and use them within CaptureOne. So what is a catalog good for? It's basically designed to have this kind of all-seeing eye over or overview of all of your photographic work, or maybe more importantly, what you choose to add to the catalog, because a catalog is not a browser. You have to physically import images into the catalog for them to be seen. So you decide what goes into the catalog, but it's designed for large collections. And another benefit of having the catalog is that it gives you clever ways to organize, search, and filter your images. So if you need to find that elusive image that you shot in 2015 of a landscape in the Serengeti or whatever, then with smart catalog organization, you can find it. So that's catalog. What's a session? Well, first of all, a session is not database driven. It's more sort of, I guess, files and folder driven, I would say.
Yeah.
So if you imagine one master folder, and by default, when you make a session in CaptureOne, it creates these four folders: capture, selects, output, and trash, which, if you like, is the natural flow of an image going through a photographic workflow. So you capture it, whether that's tethered or you import it from a camera. You would select the good ones, you process to output, and the crappy stuff goes into trash. Now, if those four default session folders aren't enough for you, you can create additional ones called session favorites. For example, if you're shooting tethered in the studio, let's say capturing a bunch of headshots for a corporate firm, and you want to have a different folder for each of those headshots, then you could extend the file system of the capture folder to have more folders. Now, the nice thing about that is that it's all encapsulated in one folder, if you like. So it's easy to move a session from place to place. It's easy to back it up, synchronize it, and so on.
Yeah.
So it's much more fluid for a high-pressured workflow.
Just a bit of history on this. Sessions is kind of a unique way to work for CaptureOne.
Totally unique, yeah.
And it was a way CaptureOne was designed first 20 years ago, I think.
Yeah, I guess, yeah.
As catalogs only came in CaptureOne 6?
7. CaptureOne 7. Yeah.
So before CaptureOne 7, everything in CaptureOne in terms of organizing was done in sessions. So yeah.
And even though it was designed for a studio workflow, it is just as applicable for a non-studio workflow. Okay, so what is a session good for? You might know by now, but it's a great way to manage just one project or task. So a wedding, headshots, as I mentioned, a particular location shoot, and so on. It's easy to move them back up because everything is encapsulated into one single folder. So if I drag that folder from, say, my internal computer's hard drive to an external hard drive, I can do that and I can open it up and CaptureOne finds all the images, no problem at all. Raw files, exports, organization, all in one place. Unlike the catalog where it could be spread across various different mediums. Best solution for high volume, high pressure jobs. So in-depth beauty shoot in the studio, headshots as we said before, anything where you have to kind of finish and wrap up a job in one place, session makes much more sense. Okay, so coming into CaptureOne, which you should see on screen now. What I'm going to do in this first section is to make a catalog, get some images into the catalog because there's some important choices there. Show you what I mean about the organization, database aspects and so on, and then we shall have a look at sessions and finish by actually combining the two, shock horror. Because there is no reason why you cannot use both in your workflow, which if you're smart, many people do. Okay.
Spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert,
that was
yes.
The title. What to choose.
What to choose, yeah. Okay, so I'm going to say in CaptureOne, file, new catalog, like so. First of all, you know what? I forgot to start my little mouse locator, as if you've ever watched a webinar before, you know I always forget to start it. So, file new catalog. So let's call this catalog webinar. Over here, helps if this is highlighted. Webinar PM for the afternoon. Now, by default, the catalog database, I shall say, will go in your pictures folder. If you want to change that location, you can just hit the box with 3 dots, and that will take you into a standard browser, whether you're in Mac or Windows. So let's create Webinar PM. Let's expand this out so it's a little larger. So a brand new empty catalog. Now, all I've created so far, as if you remember from the keynote at the start, is simply this, the CaptureOne database. And right now it's tiny, it's only 188 kilobytes because there's nothing in it. So we're not collected any images, metadata, or made previews or anything like that. So let's get some images into it. So that's a simple file, import images, or use the enormous button in the center of the screen, like so. Now this will open up the import dialog, which is basically where we choose the source of our images, so the first part, import from, and what we want to do with those images. So I'm going to browse to, I have a small external hard drive attached, and I'm going to go to this folder here, import collection, like so, and say open. So CaptureOne will give me pretty instant view of what's there. Of course, this could be a memory card from a camera as well. Now, under import collection, you'll see a tick box that reads include subfolders. So if you're importing a more complex folder tree, CaptureOne can drill down and import every image in the folder tree that it finds. And there's also a useful feature for excluding duplicates. So if you're importing from the same memory card, say throughout the day, and you don't want to reformat it every time you put it back in the camera, then you can automatically get rid of those duplicates. So import from, where are the images coming from? Second part, import to. This is really what or where we're going to place those images. Now for this demo, I'm going to use the first option, which is current location. So the images will stay where they are. CaptureOne will know where to access them, and obviously all their adjustments and metadata, but nothing gets moved. Now, if we were importing from a memory card, that would be a poor choice if you like, because we don't want to leave the images on the memory card. We want to put them somewhere safe. So in that instance, we would choose the last one, which is choose folder, somewhere to put them. Whether that's internal hard drive, external, and so on, doesn't matter. There's a third and sort of quirky option, which is called inside catalog. And this is really here for sort of legacy Aperture users who may have come to CaptureOne probably a long time ago now. And that really is an option to create what we call a managed catalog. So instead of images belonging on your hard drive and being visible in, I guess, the Finder or Windows Explorer, they will be tucked inside the catalog database itself. And that creates a managed catalog. Now the benefit of that is that it's easy to transport, because I could just move this to a different location and open it, as all the images would be inside it. But the big disadvantage is that the catalog can only be as big as the size of your hard drive. Now I have 400 gig left. You have what, 80, I think, on your laptop?
I'm really bad at file management.
So of course that's the major limitation. But for smaller, I guess, portable catalogs, it's interesting for some people. But I'm going to use current location. Now everything under that, I won't dig into detail today. There is another webinar you can watch which goes into much more detail about catalog management. But these other sections is kind of bonus things like creating a backup, renaming images, adding basic metadata, or adding a style or a preset to your images. But I'm just going to go right ahead and say import all down the bottom here. And then CaptureOne will bring those in, as you can see, pretty quick. And now at this point, what CaptureOne is doing is creating previews. So let's look at activities. Oh, I think it was on the other screen. Maybe it was too quick. Oh, there it is. Oh, 5 seconds left. Okay. So at this point, CaptureOne is now generating previews. And if we look at our webinar catalog or CaptureOne catalog, you can see it's grown to just over 40 megabytes. So CaptureOne creates a high quality preview of every single image that we've imported. Now, very importantly, if we quickly look in the preferences, you'll see we have one option in images to decide on how big these previews should be on the long edge. So 2560 pixels across, that's plenty for the resolution of my monitor. But if you say had a 4K screen or a 4K iMac or a 5K screen, if you're lucky enough for that, or a 5K iMac, then these previews will not be big enough. Because basically what happens in CaptureOne when we open up an image, we're not looking at the raw data, we're looking at the preview file. So that allows me to browse through nice and quickly, adjusting the image if we sort of pull sliders or whatever, then we're still only looking at the preview data. It's only when I need to zoom into 100% that CaptureOne then needs the raw data to present that. You can see it's still pretty nice and snappy. But having those previews makes it snappier still. But if they're not big enough, then it's going to give you a performance impact, because every time you move to a new image, if the preview isn't big enough, then it's going to slow you down. So make sure you set that to the right size for your screen. If you've been using a larger screen and using CaptureOne and haven't changed that, you can, of course, change it now. You'll just want to say File, Regenerate Previews, like so. And you can do that on a batch. Now, what's happened after our import? If we go to the very first tool tab, this is our Library tool tab, which basically is the area where we can manage all of our images. So it's divided into 3 sections: Catalog Collections, we'll come back to that, User Collections, we'll come back to that, and Folders. So Folders is the important one, which shows us our actual physical location of where your images are. You'll see it will match what I have on the hard drive itself. So if I just go to the same path, you'll see we've got Traveler SSD, images, import collection. Traveler SSD, images, import collection, like so. Now, if I was to import from somewhere else, let's just do that. Make a quick import. Let's just go to pictures, old documents. I had some just JPEGs, for example, hiding in here. So let's open that. I'll leave them in their current location once more and say import all. And you see now I can see that we've got images also in this location, like so. So it doesn't matter, the catalog database sits on my internal hard drive, but images can be spread around any other location. So I have 6 images here on my internal hard drive and 33 images here on my external hard drive. Simple. We had a good question this morning, or several questions, which were all kind of related around moving images, moving folders, and so on and so forth. And this is really crucial for, I guess, good catalog management, yes, or good catalog principles, yes. So. Because what you don't want to do is break your catalog. If you break your catalog, you can fix it, but there really is no need to break it in the first place.
How would you break it?
Well, to not break it, if I wanted to say move this image from here to this folder, then I can just simply drag and drop within CaptureOne or drag and drop over here, and it's physically moved like so. So that's the way not to break your catalog, is to do complete file operations like that. Equally, if I wanted to move an entire folder, I could just drag and drop it from, for example, my external hard drive to my internal, or vice versa.
So basically do it within CaptureOne.
Do everything within CaptureOne. Don't do, for example, go to here and then take an image and then move it somewhere else, because then it will become offline. We can always relocate offline images or folders that you've moved by right-clicking and saying locate and just pointing CaptureOne to the new location. Because a catalog does not monitor your entire file system. That would be too much of a performance overhead. So the golden rule is simply do everything from within CaptureOne and you'll have no problems whatsoever.
That's a good slogan.
Yes.
Do everything in CaptureOne.
Do everything in CaptureOne. Now, if, for example, I wanted to move this folder to somewhere else, but I can't see it in the folders area, that's the whole point of having the plus button up here. So if I say plus, go to my hard drive and make a new folder. Let's just call this Cuba, for example, and say add down in the bottom right. Then you see CaptureOne now has this folder like so. So I could pick this image up and drag it there. And then you see it's nicely moved. Equally, I could pick up this entire folder and move it to that spot. All its contents will be moved like so. And say move, and now it's safely moved to that point. And we can put this back here. Easy. So do it in CaptureOne, no problems whatsoever. I think that covers that section. Yeah. Just really the golden rule: do everything in CaptureOne. And you can do images and folders, no problem whatsoever. One little last thing about images on external hard drives: if I was to eject this image, I won't be able to, and I'll tell you why. Because our screen recording is onto this hard drive. But just so you know, if I was to eject this hard drive, my mistake, people, you can still see all the images, you can still browse and so on and so forth. They're just shown as offline, but I can still make adjustments and so on.
So you're adjusting the previews?
Yeah, you're simply adjusting the previews. The only thing you couldn't do, of course, is export, because you need access to the raw data.
So you could, on a job, plug in an external hard drive, import all your images to the external hard drive, into a catalog on your computer, eject the external hard drive, and sit on a train all the way home without having to fiddle with and
exactly
a hard drive and then do adjustments.
Especially if the hard drive's big and bulky or it needs power or whatever, then you can avoid all that. And you can do all the adjustments, star rating, organization, without needing access to that.
Isn't that what's called smart previews?
Yes, smart previews in Lightroom, which was in CaptureOne since 2012. So, all right. Going up to catalog collections, these are fixed collections, so you can't change anything here. They're shortcuts. It's probably a good way to say it. So all images shows me all the images in the catalog regardless of where they are. Now, a really nice little tip. Let's say I look at this image. Let's just open this up. I think, I really wish I knew which hard drive this image was on because I want to, copy it off or whatever. Super nice little tip. Right click, and you can do this from any collection. This could be from an album, which we're going to see later. This is the all images collection. But if I say show in library, straight away, it'll go to the folder where the image is stored and then highlight it as well.
There's a very good question from Valentina about if you do adjustments to a preview, will they be updated or synchronized to the raw file when you plug it back in?
Okay. No such thing needs to happen.
No. And I answered yes, because it will be applied to the raw file, but it's not that it has to synchronize.
No.
Because the adjustments are stored within the catalog and not in the raw file.
And the raw files themselves, if I right click and say show in Finder, from the moment this is imported into CaptureOne, we never we never write anything to it. We never change it. No. So the fact that, say this image here, the lighthouse, if I make this change like so, for example, we haven't changed anything on the raw file, it's just in the catalog database. So whether or not the raw file is actually available is totally irrelevant because we don't need the raw file because we're working off the preview. So even if Alex sitting on his train with 1,000 images edited every single one, as soon as he plugged his external hard drive back in, it's not like you'll see a dialogue saying synchronizing, come back in 15 minutes.
It's just there.
It's there. Yeah.
Magic.
Magic. Yeah, absolute magic. Yes. But this neat little trick, and even if this hard drive wasn't connected, it would show a red line here. Even though these images are on that hard drive, I can right click and say show in library. So, let's go to the all images collection. So let's just pick something else so I'm not cheating. Right click, say show in library. Then it highlights the folder it's in, highlights the image, and I can see, okay, I need to plug in Traveler SSD to export that. Because if you've ended up with a whole bunch of different external drives or whatever, and you can't connect them all at once, you run out of USB ports, or you're disorganized and you have clutter everywhere or whatever, then you'll know exactly which hard drive to plug in if I wanted to export that image. Also in catalog collections, you've got the 10 most recent imports, handy if you want to track imports from memory cards. Recent captures, but both Alex and I will tell you don't shoot tethered to a catalog. It's much better to do it to a session.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, because if you shoot tethered to a catalog, you've got to set up a whole bunch of stuff like capture folders and so on, and all of that's done for you automatically in a session. Now, the clever bit of a catalog and the most important part is user collections. So all the things you've seen down here in folders, these involve physically moving. Let's just grab this guy and move him to Cuba, physically moving the image on disk. So if I go to Cuba and right click and say show in Finder, then you'll see he is now sitting in Cuba like so. So all of the operations you've seen at this point have involved physically moving images around on the disk. Now that's fine, but there's a limitation with that. Let's say, for example, our Cuba man here, I thought, this is going to be worthy of a portfolio shot, so I might like to put him in a folder called portfolio shots. But what if I want to do something else with it, like keep it in a collection or a folder for my website? I can't have a raw file in two different folders at the same time unless I duplicate it. But that would be crazy because then you're going to use up more disk space. Which raw file is current, which one has the current adjustments, and so on. So this is where user collections comes in, which are virtual collections. Once again, all of that is stored within our CaptureOne catalog. So the database is aware of all the user collections. Now we have 4 different organizational tools: album, smart album, project, and group. All do slightly different things and have different actions. Album is easy to appreciate. That is just a very basic collection of images. So let's make an album. I'm going to call that Cuba, for example. And then what I can do very easily, let's just make these thumbnails smaller, is drag and drop 1 or more images into that collection like so. So 4 Cubans like so. Now the nice thing about, of course, having these collections is that it doesn't matter if the same image belongs in multiple collections, because we don't physically move anything on disk. So if I use my analogy earlier, I'll create another album. I'm going to call this Stuff to Print, like so. And then there's nothing to stop me dragging the same image into that album, for example. And once again, nothing physically moved on disk, all virtual collections. So an album, just a very simple collection of images. If I go back to all images, and this time we're going to create a smart album. Now, rather than dragging and dropping images into the smart album, it populates itself based on its search criteria. So a very, very simple example is that we want a smart album which only contains 5-star images. Now, within this dialog of creating the smart album, you have to identify the search criteria. There are many, many different categories that you can pick from, which include every single metadata aspect of the image, camera details like lens and aperture, shutter speed, you name it, you can set it as a search criteria. And of course, you can also combine search criteria together to make more complex rules. But we're going to keep it simple, and we're going to use a preset which lives up here, which is 5 stars. So the rating must equal 5 stars for an image to belong into this smart album. Right now it's empty, but if I just take any image and hit it with a, let's just go down here, 5 star, 5 on my keyboard, and let's grab this one as well, 5 on my keyboard, then they pop up like so in that smart collection. Simple. Next one, getting a bit more clever with what we can do, is a project.
Those two I always mix them up. Until today, I didn't know exactly what the difference was between a project and a group.
Yeah, a project and a group. So the group is going to be after this. So the project is really where you can exercise the power, I guess, of organization. So I'm going to call this, what should we call this? Let's call this Trip to Cuba, to stick on our Cuban theme, and say OK. Now it might be tricky to see on the webinar transmission, but you can basically see that the icon, see the album is just a simple square, smart album is a square with a cog, and then the project, I liken it to a cardboard box with a lid. So if you're old enough, like me, to remember negatives and slides, if we had one single project, we would grab a new box, we would toss all our negatives in there, write a label on the front saying Trip to Cuba, and perhaps throw in some prints and other stuff as well. So this is the same thing. Now if I try and grab an image and drag it into the project, I can't do it. So you cannot drag images directly into the project. We need an album in there first. So I'm going to right click and say new inside, and let's make an album. And I'm going to call this all images like so. All images. Now there's nothing in there right now, so let's go back to all images and let's pick up some stuff from Cuba. So let's just, not all of it's Cuba, but poetic license, and drag all of that in here like so. Okay, so now we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 images. Now the whole point of having a project, if you like, it's a ring fence or a boundary to other smart albums that might be in it. So if I right click once more and I make exactly the same smart album as we did earlier, 5-star images.
That's actually a good question from Nicholas.
Okay.
Saying how you can limit the results within a smart album.
Aha!
So that is...
There we go, Nicholas.
Exactly what you're doing right now.
Exactly. So if we say OK, and remember 5-star images here, it's not sitting inside any project, so it's searching my entire catalog of 39 images. If I go to all images here and let's make our smiling gentleman 5 images, you can see now that I have 1 image in there. So this smart album only searches any image which is in this project. So Nicholas, that's really how you can limit that. I mean, there are other complex ways of doing it. For example, we could have like date ranges and camera types and so on. But the easiest way to do it is to limit using a project. So this global smart album here quite rightly has picked it up because it's 5 stars. But this smart album here excludes those other 2 because they don't belong in the Cuba project.
Another good question from Levin. Sorry about that. Can you take a catalog with all images on a desktop computer, move only the catalog to a laptop computer, do all the editing away, and then move the catalog back to the desktop computer?
Yes.
And have it done? I
guess you could. Yeah. I mean, you can move the catalog around quite happily. In nerdy R&D terms, we call this a document, like a Word document or a whatever Excel document. Really doesn't matter where this is. So if I picked this up and moved it to a different location, it's fine. I can still open it. So if we shut this catalog down and I copied it onto this hard drive, it would open up. No problem at all. It's just a simple document. So if you wanted to move it somewhere else or just work off it on an external hard drive, you could do that as well. So moving the catalog is really no issue whatsoever. It's moving the folders that it's linked to is the issue. If you don't do it within CaptureOne. Do it within CaptureOne, no problem. So project, very smart way to limit the scope of a smart album without having to do anything clever with date ranges or keywords or anything like that. Now the last one, no special functionality. It's the tidy up element. So if I make a new group, and I'm going to call this personal work, for example, and you see the icon is different again. It just looks like a simple folder. So for example, my trip to Cuba could be personal work, like so. And if I make another group, and let's make one called commercial work, like so, then already I've tidied up this area. Because you can imagine, the more and more sort of projects you have, this area could get very long until it sort of falls off the end of the screen and you're always having to scroll up and down. So groups are just, if you like, the tidy up folder. There's nothing to stop me putting a group inside a project. So if I right click, I can say new inside. So I could, if I wanted to be really sort of OCD, I could divide up my smart albums and albums into groups as well. I mean, if you're doing a long running project, like so, then you might find this gets, much more sort of organized. Like if you were doing a project over a year, you were doing a study of Windows or crusty doors or something like that, then you could divide these up by location or whatever. So, but the group does not do any clever stuff like ring fencing smart albums. It's just the tidy up option. There we go. Now, if you want to go into more depth about this, you can watch previous webinars on pure catalog organization. But I think that's what we want to show so far for catalogs.
Yeah.
So, yeah, just in summary, golden rule, do everything with inside CaptureOne. Images can reside on multiple different locations, doesn't matter to us. Moving from different locations, simply do within CaptureOne. Use the plus to make the catalog aware of new locations and the minus to remove them. Don't forget the good old trick of right click and say show in library, and CaptureOne will show you exactly the location of that file and highlight it for you as well. even if that hard drive isn't connected. Okay, I'm going to pass the torch over to Alex. So we're just going to switch seats. So if the sound goes funny, don't worry.
There we go.
Yes.
Thank you. All right. So, as David has been showing all about catalogs, I'm going to show you all about sessions. Because as a couple of you mentioned, you work a lot in sessions, as do I. And I love sessions and the way you work in them. So David has been storing all of his stuff within this catalog. And I think you can split it up and say, as long as you're working on something, I would suggest to like do it in a session.
Yes.
But once you're done working with it, you can move it inside a catalog somewhere for organizational purposes.
Yeah, I'd say active jobs are always better in a session, because for me, like when I shoot images, I don't want to import all of them into a catalog because they're not all good, sadly. If they were, that would be nice, but I don't want to import 700 images just to delete 300 of them.
Yeah.
So an active job is in a session, and then when it's done, it then goes to my catalog, which we will show at the end of the course. Yeah.
All right. First of all, I'm going to, excuse me, I'm going to create a new session. And you can do it from the tiny plus icon here, or from File, New Session. And let's call it Webinar Session PM. Just as in a catalog, you can decide the location, and if you've created a session template, we'll get back to that, you can select it here. Down here we have the 4 default empty folders ready to use that a session will provide. If you want to rename them to, let's say you want your capture folder to be called rename or import instead of capture, because you import all the images, you can do it here. It doesn't change any functionality, as it's just cosmetic, it's just the name. So let me create that. And we're not gonna back this catalog up right now. All right, so we have a new session with the 4 default folders ready to use. In a default session, you also get 2 smart albums. One is called All Images, and the other one is called 5 Stars. They are just there, ready to be used to show 5-star rated images and all images within any of these folders. A little trick on a Mac, you can right-click on the name, and then you can get the location of your catalog or session. But let me just show you the build-up of a session, because you might know how to work within these 4 folders, capture, selects, output, and trash. But if you get like a full understanding of how a session is built, it's going to be much more pleasant, and you're going to feel much safer when working in sessions. So as David mentioned in the very beginning, the slide with illustrations, the overall session folder here is called Webinar Session PM. That includes the 4 folders, capture, output, selects, and trash, and Webinar Session PM database file. Now, as opposed to a catalog, this database file will not include any previews or adjustments. It will simply include information about your session albums. So everything will be stored in folders next to it. All right, back to CaptureOne here. Let's say that we want to import images from a shoot into the capture folder because we need to start working on them. The easiest way to do that, I think, is, and also this is opposite to a catalog, you can actually do stuff in the Finder or in Windows Explorer, and it will be reflected within CaptureOne. So if I open a new Finder here, and if I go to, I have some images here shot by Andrea Beluso. What is he called? Like the Master of Lightning?
Master of Lighting.
Yeah, I
yes.
think.
Lightning or lighting?
Lightning. That'd be cool. So if I select all images and Command C to copy, and I go in here, Command V to paste them, you can see already the capture folder here is populating with the images I copy into the capture folder in my session.
Because I guess unlike a catalog, which the performance would be crippled if it monitored every single folder on your system, a session is only monitoring capture, selects, output, and trash.
Yes.
So it can keep an eye on all of those, and when changes are made, it's dynamic. So you don't have to do synchronization or anything like that. It's just works perfectly. So it's super simple.
I think actually I'm gonna do like this, because now I'm gonna show you some folder stuff in this session. Whoops, a lot of Finder windows. Close this one. Here, oh, something called cache already existed. There we go. So this shoot includes a lot of images from different looks. And if we were to shoot this tethered, we would probably split all of these looks up into different capture folders. You can actually do that after importing images into the capture folder. So just as in a catalog, you can right-click and say Show in Library. The difference between Library and Show in Finder is that Library is within CaptureOne and Finder is externally. And I think it's called Show in Explorer if you're on Windows. Yes. So if you right-click and say Show in Library, it's going to show you the capture folder within CaptureOne. Now I can right-click this and say New Inside. That will create a new folder, and let's call it Look 1. There we go. So within the capture folder, I now have a Look 1 folder. And if I open up here, next to all my raw files, you can see down here, I have the Look 1 folder. And I think we had 3 looks for this one.
Yep.
So let's create Look 2.
And actually, while you're doing that, this went back from I think it was Dennis. Dennis Blair. If I was photographing multiple day shoot in the same location, then catalog or session. Well, session, because you've got Look 1, Look 2, Look 3, but this could be day 1, day 2, day 3.
Yes.
Day 1 could be divided into further subfolders and
yes.
so on. So there's no limit to the number of sort of folders you can add.
No. Yeah. And that way it would also be easier for you to move stuff from computer to computer or external hard drive.
Backing up every evening.
Yes, because you have everything split up nicely here. So what I want to do is take these files from Look 1. There we go. And now because I'm in a session and I move them to another folder, they are physically going to be moved into Look 1 down here. Let's just wait until they are moved. Done. And let's take Look 2. Beautiful images, by the way. These are completely unadjusted. And move them to Look 2. If you haven't seen any YouTube videos with Andrea Beluso, I suggest you do it. He's Definitely. Very charismatic and very skilled. Let's select all of these images again and move them to Look 3.
And you can see it happening in the Finder window.
Yeah.
Quite nicely at this. So this is, really a nice thing about sessions, that it's dynamic.
It's very folder oriented and accessible from outside of CaptureOne as well. Now, when I click all images, nothing is shown. And that is simply because CaptureOne in a session will only show images that are within Capture Selects or Output folder, unless you add a session favorite. Because if a folder that's not any of these has to be indexed, it needs to be added as a favorite. So if I right-click all of these Look 1, Look 2, Look 3 and say Add to Favorites, already all images will include Look 1, Look 2 and Look 3. So the favorite part is simply to tell this session, index this folder as well. And add to favorites as look 3. There we go. So look 1, look 2, look 3. All right. An important aspect about sessions as well is that these up here, even though they say session folders, they are basically just shortcuts to physical folders. And if I right click again and say show in library, it's going to show me the capture folder as default. And as you can see, there's a tiny camera icon next to it indicating that this is now set as the capture folder. If I right click on another folder and say set as capture folder, currently no, it will both have a session favorite icon and a camera icon. And now if I go to this folder, for example, and then go back to the capture folder using the shortcut up here, it will show me look 1, because that's set as a capture folder. And currently the original capture folder is doing nothing. It's not a favorite, it's not functioning as a capture folder anymore, but it's just there. So important to remember, these are simply shortcuts to what's down here.
And of course, when you're shooting tethered in the studio, it's really nice that you can identify different capture folders, because then it's very easy to flip between different folders shooting into those various different looks.
And let's say that you have just shot into look 1, look 2, and look 3, and you now need a look 4. The easiest way to do it is simply right-clicking on a capture folder and say new capture folder. That will not only add it as a favorite, look 4, it will also add it next to the other looks right here within the capture folder, as you can see here. And also the camera icon is now next to look 4, because that's the new capture folder I made. So this way you can split up an entire days of work into different looks, or different, let's say, I shoot the employee portraits here in phase 1.
All our handsome employees.
Yeah. So every new employee gets their own capture folder. And that way it's easy to simply take that folder afterwards and then copy it onto an external hard drive to give all the images to them afterwards for personal use. So a session is really useful for accessing all your stuff outside of CaptureOne if needed. It also gives you a lot of processing options, as I will go into now. Unless we have any good questions.
No, Christoph was just saying now he finally understands what session favorites do, but Christina didn't, because she says, what's the purpose of favorites? And just to remember, I mean, first of all, I guess it's fast access to various different folders.
Yes.
Yeah.
And also, in a session, you can browse any folder that you want on your computer.
If you wish.
If you want to. You don't have to import anything. You can simply click on a folder with images, and CaptureOne is going to show you the content of that folder. But if you want this particular session to index, that means make it searchable and apply filters to the content of that folder, you need to add it as a favorite. Otherwise, this session will not include the specific folder when searching and filtering.
So by default, it will only search in captures, selects, and output of the current session, and anything else you add as a. And that's really important. Like if you go back in the webinar archive, there's actually a whole webinar just on session management, and that has a lot more smart albums than just 5-star and all images. It has at least 15 smart albums of different color tags and star ratings and so on. And if the capture folders, and this is an e-commerce example, so outfit 1, outfit 2, outfit 3, if they weren't added as a favorite, then those smart albums would be useless because it wouldn't know to search in those.
Exactly.
So favorites are crucial.
Great. Okay, now when it comes to export, because some of you might be wondering why I didn't simply create session albums and then moved all my images into the respective looks within an album. And the difference is that a session album is virtual, as any image can be in as many albums, smart albums, as you want to, while the favorites is a physical folder, and a physical file can only be in one physical folder at a time, represented out here. So, when I go and create process recipes, let me just delete this one. What I can do now is create a new process recipe, go to webinar, let's say, session recipe. There we go. Now I want preview-sized JPEGs. So I create a JPEG, let's say 80% in quality. It's going to be used online, so sRGB. And I want it to be a specific long edge size, let's say 2500 pixels. That's nice. All right. Now, within File, as a default, the root folder where they're going is output location. This is a bit tricky to wrap your head around sometimes. But if it says output location, it will go down to the tool called output location down here. And that destination is per default set to the session output folder, as you can see here. There's a little trick. If you click on the arrow next to destination, it's going to open a Finder or an Explorer to show you that exact folder. So I want my output images to go into the output folder of the session. Now, I also want the output to be split up as it is within the capture folder. And the way to do that is to, in the subfolder of the process recipe, open this submenu and add a token. If I filter on tokens, I can go to General, and there's one called Image Folder Name. If I double click that, you can see already a sample of the current image we have selected is look 1. So it already fetched that information. If I click OK, now all images I process will be put into a subfolder depending on which physical folder they're in. So if I just select one image from, let's go back to all images, select one image from look 1, one image from look 2, and one image from look 3. By the way, to do this, you hold down Command or Control to select multiple images individually. And going back to the recipe, it seems to be ready. I'm not going into details with any of the other ones. That's another webinar.
Yep.
But processing multiple images, make sure that you have Edit All Selected Variants enabled. So it needs to be orange like this. It's also available from the Edit menu. Otherwise, you're only going to process the first image. But we enable this, click Process, and in the Output folder, you can see it will populate with the 3 respected look folders, and each output file will be in their respected output folder.
Woo!
It's almost like magic.
And the benefit of that is that you can process from a virtual collection like a 5-star album, for example. So, I mean, to do this old school way, you'd have to go into the Look 1 folder, choose the image, process it out, go to the Look 2 folder, choose the image, process it out, and so on. This way, you can have a finalized smart collection like all 5-star images, process them all out, regardless of where they reside, and have them automatically output. So you can save tons of time if you set this up in a smart way.
Yes.
And there is a whole webinar as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
I use it for weddings to spit out all my images into different folders. That makes it easy for the client. One important aspect about sessions that I actually forgot to mention in the beginning is within any folder that has images in it, where CaptureOne has looked into that folder. So if you add anything as a favorite, or if you browse any folder with content in it, CaptureOne is going to create this CaptureOne subfolder. And that subfolder includes all the previews and all the adjustments related to the raw file. So I think opposite as a catalog, sessions will store all the adjustments next to the raw file. This means that if I, from any point in the future, will access this folder from any session, I will still see all the adjustments. And that's different from a catalog.
Yes, because the catalog has a centralized database, if you like.
Exactly.
Whereas a session has local database, if we want to call it that, or local information per folder of images.
Yes. Yeah. And we had a good question in the beginning about EIP files, because that's pretty relevant right now. Because what if, let's say we want to move this image with all the adjustments to another computer, but only this image. If you want to include the adjustments, you can of course transfer the whole folder, but that includes everything. But if you only want one image, you can right click and say pack as EIP. It's short for Enhanced Image Package. It's basically a zip file that includes the raw file and the preview and all the adjustments and anything else you might have applied to this file. It's of course at any time possible to unpack the EIP as well. But as you can see out here, it has now the extension of EIP instead of IIQ. That's a phase 1 file. So if I take this file, move it to another computer and open it inside CaptureOne, it will have everything that I'm adjusted within this session. Another way to do it is to right click and say export originals as opposed to variants. A variant will process the image in any format you choose, while original will export a copy of the raw file somewhere of your choice. So if we say desktop set as export folder and we want to pack it as an EIP, I can now export all of these 3 different images as EIP files to my desktop. As you can see here, I have 3 EIP files now on my desktop. So that's the way to use EIP files.
Do you mind if I answer a question from Clifford? I think it's Clifford.
Yeah.
Hang on, if I just scroll over here. Clifford was asking what's the difference between subfolder here and subfolder here. Essentially, they both do the same job, but in the process recipe, the subfolder location is unique for that particular process recipe. In the output location, it's global for any process recipe. So if, for example, we use the token recipe name, like so, and I had 2 or 3 process recipes running, what CaptureOne would do the flow is like this. So in the file tab of any recipe, it will go to the output location tool, in this case, check to see if there's a token, make that folder, return back to the process recipe, create that folder, and continue. So for example, with recipe name, if we activated these 3 recipes, then in the output folder, I would have 3 folders called Instagram, JPEG, and Webinar. And then within those folders would be whatever tokens we used here.
Yeah.
Now that might sound a bit head exploding, but if it's actually very powerful for yes. more complex export routing.
Let's say you want all images, regardless of process recipe, to go into a subfolder called day 1.
Yes.
Then you wouldn't have to add day 1 as a subfolder in all your process recipes. You can simply add it down here.
Yes, absolutely.
So, yeah. All right. So I think that was the basic understanding of sessions and how to use that. So I use it to work on the images, and when they're done, all my output images will be in the output folder. And for organizational purposes, you can actually import a session into a catalog.
Yes.
And if we just switch seats again.
Yeah. Proper technology here, changing seats. Yeah. Okay. So, for example, if we wanted to, let's say Alex had finished, I'm just going to expand this guy out again. Let's say Alex, or Andrea Beluso, I should say, had finished this session and he was now ready to archive this into his catalog, then that's very easy to do. So I'm just going to close this down and let's say new catalog. I'm going to call this my session archive, like so. So brand new empty catalog. Now before we import our session, we want to make sure it's in the location that we want it to be. So if this is where you want your session to be, that's fine. But for me, the way I work is that I work locally in sessions on my pictures folder on my hard drive. When I feel it's done, like I've done all my processing and adjusting and exporting, I move it and it's just a drag and drop to my external hard drive I have at home. And then from there, then I import it into my catalog. So it's very simple. We say File, Import Session. We find the session that we want to import, and then we target the co-session.db, because this has information about the user collections, favorites, and all those kinds of things, and actually where the capture output selects trash folder is. So I just target that and say import, like so. Nothing gets moved, so there's no moving of files. That's why I say make sure it is in the location that it needs to be before you move that in. Now you'll see under user collections, CaptureOne automatically makes this nice little structure which shows you capture output selects and trash. In this case, we don't really need these. Well, maybe the outputs if you've outputted directly. But then we have our session albums, all images and 5 stars, and other ones that you might have created, and then all our various different look folders. Easy.
This is a good example to show that all images, because it's within a project,
yes,
will only show all images
within that session.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly that.
So basically a project is like a mini catalog within your major catalog.
Yeah, or a session within a catalog.
Yeah.
Now what I do, just as a little tip, also to session favorites, I add my output folders, just so I have fast access to them. And my output folders are normally named things like Instagram 1080 pixels across. Now I don't do anything professional, or Facebook upload or whatever, so then I can go to those favorite albums and actually see all the JPEGs and everything that I've done as well. So that's my tip. Before you import the session, add the output folders as a session favorite as well. But it really is as simple as that. Now I think somebody asked earlier on as a question, what if they wanted all these images inside the catalog? So as a managed catalog. Well, all you would have to do is go to the last import. So if I go to recent imports, that basically shows me all the images from that session. And what you can do then is say select all, and you can drag them to the in catalog icon. And that will convert them to managed images and copy them inside the catalog. Now, all this structure will still remain the same and it will all still work. It's just the location of those images are in a different place. Now, crucial last comment to make is that once you have moved once you've imported your session into your catalog, you can, of course, open an image and you can go ahead and you can make adjustments and so on and so forth. But if I was to then open the session, then these adjustments would not be reflected. So the adjustments made in a catalog do not synchronize back to the old session.
No.
So that's why I call it archive.
Yeah.
That's really important. Yeah.
But it will, of course, take the adjustments you made in the session and apply it or copy those adjustments into the catalog.
Yes, exactly. So if we'd adjusted this image in the session, we'd of course see that in the catalog. Yes, absolutely. But that's why I always like to refer it to as an archive, because it's not an asynchronous thing. So, yeah.
So while you work on a project, do it in sessions. When you're done, archive it.
Yeah, and I think it was Christoph who made a comment earlier, this would be a great way for like a portfolio catalog, because right away what you could do, you can imagine you'd have 10, 20, 30 sessions here, but what I could do is make a smart album, and I could call that global 5-star images, if that's how you tag your best shots. Make a preset, 5 stars, say OK. And then this would show me every single 5-star image in my entire catalog. So straight away you'd get a really nice overview of all your images. So if I made this one 5-star and this one, then straight away those would then appear. So a smart album can be a great way to monitor certain image types, like in this case, all the 5-star images in every single session you have. That's a great way to keep an up-to-date portfolio.
Yeah.
Yep. Sweet. All right. I think that was it. And as we said, if you want to know more about any particular subject, then of course we have previous webinars. One in particular I'll point you towards is Ultimate Session Workflow, it was called, or Exploring Session Workflows, one or the other. And previous to that was also Organising your CaptureOne catalog, which goes more in depth with catalog organisation. I think that's pretty much where we are at with today. So I hope it was useful for everyone listening. Neither is really complicated. It's just getting a handle on how you can use it most effectively for your workflow. You don't have to decide on one or the other. You can quite happily use both depending on what you're doing. The only thing I would say, and be a little bit specific about it, is if you shoot tethered, then sessions all the way. And you can also look at, what was the webinar called? Optimizing tethered capture, I think, because there's lots of stuff today on sessions about tethered, which we didn't look at, like file naming, I guess, for example, like how to figure out next capture file naming, adjustments for next captures, all those kinds of things. So there's a lot more we can talk about for tethered capture too.
Yeah. Hopefully this made asset management in CaptureOne less scary.
Yes, because everyone is always afraid of asset management, regardless of application, and don't need to be afraid.
No.
just give it a just give it a try. Just test and play around, and so on. Okay, normally at this point we say next webinar, but that will be coming up in a couple of weeks. It's just not up on the events page of the website yet, but it will be soon. Look out tomorrow for a follow-up email which contains links to the YouTube channel and various other bits and pieces as well. And look out for that sometime tomorrow. You will get that in your inbox.
Great.
Thanks, Alex. See you all soon. Take care.